On a cold March afternoon in 1977, a 6-year-old girl vanished without a trace from one of the most isolated hillsides in Ireland. Despite one of the largest search operations the country had ever seen, not a single piece of evidence was ever found. No clothing, no footprints, no body. It's as if she simply disappeared into thin air. For nearly 5 decades, investigators have been haunted by a single, devastating question. How does a child vanish so completely that even the most exhaustive search finds nothing? This is the strange disappearance of Mary Boyle. But before we dive into this mystery, if you're enjoying this content, please hit that like button, drop a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe to Cold Case Chronicle. Your support helps us bring you more unsolved cases like this one. Mary Boyle was born on the 14th of June, 1970, in Spark Hill, Birmingham, England. Her parents, Anne and Charlie Boyle, were both originally from Ireland, and the family included Mary's twin sister, also named Anne, and her older brother, Paddy. Not long after the twins were born, the family made the decision to move back to Ireland, settling in Cashelard in the Rosses area of County Donegal. It seems they simply wanted to be closer to their relatives. This move placed them in a rural, close-knit community where extended family visits would be much easier than they had been in England. The Boyle family had returned to their roots, to the land where generations of their family had lived before them, seeking the comfort and familiarity of home. It was a decision that would set the stage for the events to come. On the 17th of March, 1977, St. Patrick's Day, Mary and her immediate family drove from their home in Cashelard to visit their grandparents at their isolated dairy farm in Cashelard. This was near Ballyshannon, on the Donegal-Fermanagh border. The farm sat in a remote, hilly area with boggy terrain, and at that time, there were no nearby telephones or modern amenities. The gathering at this rural farmhouse comprised 6 adults and 5 children in total. It was a typical family celebration, the kind that happens in Irish households across the country on their national holiday, filled with warmth, laughter, and the connection that comes from being surrounded by those you love. The family stayed overnight, and it would be the following day, the 18th of March, 1977, when everything changed. When a routine family visit would transform into a nightmare that would never end. The location of this farm is significant. The terrain it was situated in presented huge difficulties for the subsequent searches. The proximity to Northern Ireland also introduced jurisdictional complexities, as border incidents so often do. The centralization of information becomes awkward, and multiple authorities have to stay in constant communication to keep things organized. This was 1977, during the height of the Troubles in Northern Ireland, and that border carried weight and complications that went beyond simple geography. The morning of the 18th began routinely. Mary, who was 6 at the time, helped her mother with the dishes after the family had eaten. It was a simple moment of domestic life, a small girl doing her part to help, learning the rhythms of family responsibility. Afterwards, they shared a hug, and Mary left to go outside to play with her sister and the other children. She was dressed in a lilac hand-knitted cardigan, brown jeans, ribbons in her hair, and black Wellington boots that were slightly too big, perfect for the muddy countryside. She looked like any other child in rural Ireland, dressed for play and adventure in the open spaces that surrounded the farmhouse. At 3:30 in the afternoon, Mary was outside playing with the others when her uncle, Jerry Gallagher, came out of the house to collect a ladder he had borrowed from the Macaulays, who owned a neighboring farm. He intended to return it, and as he set off, Mary decided she wanted to go with him. She began to follow, eating a packet of crisps as she walked. It was an innocent decision, the kind children make dozens of times a day, following an adult on an errand, turning a mundane task into a small adventure. The neighboring farmhouse was approximately 800 meters away, across the hillside, up an isolated, unpaved shortcut. It was a journey that would usually take around 10 minutes or less. The route, which was practically a straight line, cut through a boggy area. This was not an unusual path. It was one that locals would have known well, a shortcut between 2 properties in an area where shortcuts were necessary given the terrain and distances involved. What happened next would become the subject of decades of speculation and investigation. According to the local superintendent at the time, Don Murray, as Jerry and Mary proceeded down the path, they reached a pool of water, a flooded section of the lane that was too deep for her to cross without getting soaked. At this point, somewhere between 3:30 and 3:45 in the afternoon, she gave up and turned around to head back to the grandparents' house. It was a reasonable decision for a 6-year-old to make. The water was too deep, her boots were already too big for her feet, and home was just a short walk back the way she had come. This separation occurred at the midpoint of the path to the Macaulay's farm. It would be the last time Mary Boyle was ever seen. Jerry continued on to the neighbor's farm, where it was reported that he stopped and spoke to the Macaulays for about 30 minutes. This was normal for rural Ireland, where neighborly visits often extended into lengthy conversations, where returning a borrowed tool could turn into a half-hour chat about weather, farming, and local news. Upon returning to the grandparents' house just before 4:20 in the afternoon, Jerry set himself up along a wall he'd started to fix on the property and got to work. He had no reason to think anything was wrong. Mary had turned back to go home, a journey of just a few minutes, and he had completed his errand. It was just after 4:20 when Mary's mother came outside to check on the children playing and realized that Mary was not there. Family members, including Anne, began searching the immediate area outside the property. They called out her name and checked the nearby fields, fences, and hedges, but there was no trace of Mary anywhere. They didn't find any clothing scraps, nor the crisp packet, and they didn't find any obvious footprints to indicate she'd strayed away. The search started small, with family members checking the obvious places, calling her name, expecting at any moment to hear her voice calling back or to see her emerge from behind a building or hedge. It was noted that if Mary had fallen into a bog, the crisp packet would likely have floated to the surface somewhere later. It was never discovered. The return journey to the house should have taken her around 5 minutes, with some accounts suggesting it should have taken only about 3. She was around 400 meters away, since she'd only made it halfway down the path. It was a simple, straightforward walk back to safety, back to her family, back to the warmth of the farmhouse. But she never made it. Here's what Mary's mother said. "I looked out the front door. The rest of the children were playing in a thicket in the front garden. Mary was not there. My brother Jerry was fixing a stone wall in front of the house. I asked him if he'd seen Mary. He didn't answer. He must not have heard me. 10 minutes later, I asked, 'Did anyone see Mary?' And Jerry shot off in his car down the road. When Jerry came back to the house, he said that she'd followed him earlier to the Macaulay's house and that she'd turned back. I got into the car and drove along the road in different directions. It was a nightmare." Those words, spoken by a mother who would spend the rest of her life searching for answers, carry the weight of unimaginable anguish. A nightmare, she called it. But nightmares end when you wake up. This nightmare would continue for decades, with no resolution, no awakening, no relief. If you're finding this case as compelling as I am, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and hit that subscribe button for Cold Case Chronicle. It really helps us continue bringing you these important stories. By late afternoon, as daylight faded, the family continued their search. With no landline available, they flagged down fishermen on the nearby loch. Jerry was searching around the area when and shouted for him to go and alert the Gardaí, the Irish police. Jerry called back for her to do it, as he wanted to keep searching. In the end, one of the fishermen, P.J. Coughlin, drove to Ballyshannon to alert the Gardaí somewhere between 5 and 6 o'clock in the evening, around 2 hours after Mary was last seen. 2 hours. In a missing child case, 2 hours can mean the difference between finding a child safe and never finding them at all. Panic set in as searchers, including all of the family, combed the steep, boggy terrain, shouting Mary's name. An appeal for volunteers was broadcast that evening from a local theater during a drama festival, which bolstered boots on the ground. The community response was immediate and overwhelming. People left their homes, their dinners, their evening activities to join the search for a little girl they may never have met, but whose disappearance touched something fundamental in their hearts. That evening, and well into the night, the Gardaí were present and initiated formal searches. According to accounts from the original investigating Gardaí, they cited that the 2-hour delay in notifying them was crucial. It was stated that losing those initial golden hours significantly reduced the chances of finding Mary, regardless of what had actually taken place, whether she was suffering from an accident or facing something more sinister. In the event of something more troubling, if a stranger had been nearby, for example. It meant that this potential person had ample time and opportunity to cross into a nearby county or across the border entirely. The border with Northern Ireland was close enough that someone could have crossed it multiple times in those 2 hours. And in 1977, with the security situation focused on terrorism and smuggling, the movement of individuals might not have been as closely monitored as it would be in other circumstances. When the Gardaí did arrive, they questioned family members and the fishermen. One of them reported seeing a suspicious red car. While it's not clear precisely what they told the Gardaí at that time, in 2016, P.J. Coughlin stated, "I believe I saw her being driven away in a car. There's no doubt in my mind that she was taken." This was a strong statement, a definitive belief about what had happened to Mary. However, on a BBC podcast in 2019, he would change, or rather correct, his statement. He stated then that he had not seen Mary herself, just the suspicious red car. If Mary was not seen in or near the car, then it's not entirely clear what was suspicious about it, other than it being in that exact area at that exact time. Given how isolated the area was, you'd have to imagine it wasn't local and the people present hadn't seen it before. In a place where everyone knows everyone and strangers are immediately noticeable, an unfamiliar vehicle would certainly stand out. That would also have required extraordinary timing and would have required Mary to have crossed paths with the occupants. Given that the fishermen hadn't seen Mary, you can't really make definitive statements, though I can see how it would have appeared odd. In any case, one of the largest search efforts to ever have taken place in Ireland was about to begin. In the days following the 18th, the Gardaí created a filmed reconstruction of Mary's last known movements, using her twin sister as a stand-in, and was able to successfully retrace the path from the point of separation from Jerry back to the house, without any problems at all. The reconstruction showed that the path was navigable, that a 6-year-old could complete the journey without difficulty, which only deepened the mystery of what had happened to Mary. Divers came in and started probing the loughs. The entire lake at Upper Cashelard, behind the grandparents' house, was drained. This was a massive undertaking, pumping out thousands of gallons of water to expose the lake bed, which was then meticulously searched. Local neighbors, family members, and many volunteers, alongside a large Gardaí presence, scoured the challenging terrain together. Lines of searchers moved across the hillsides, checking every hollow, every bush, every possible place where a small child might have fallen or hidden or been concealed. Strangely, not a single piece of evidence was found anywhere. Nothing. Not a button, not a ribbon, not a scrap of fabric, not the crisp packet. It was as if Mary had never been there at all. The Irish Army got involved too, and despite searching for months, still nothing was found. These search parties examined fields, hedgerows, bogs, and waterways. Many of the local bogs were drained in an effort to find any hint of Mary, but it just wasn't happening. The bogs, those treacherous features of the Irish landscape that could swallow a person and hide them forever, were excavated and examined. Still nothing. Based on the publicly reported timeline surrounding this case, Jerry returned to the farmhouse at around 4:20 in the afternoon, or just before. This was after having been last seen with Mary sometime between approximately 3:30 and 3:45. It has been stated in media coverage that he spoke with the Macaulays for around 30 minutes during that interval. If that is accurate, this timeline would significantly reduce the amount of unaccounted-for time before the family search began. Given the rural, hilly, and boggy nature of that terrain, the distance a person could have traveled on foot in that window, off the path, would have been very limited. A 6-year-old child, particularly one wearing Wellington boots that were too big, couldn't have covered much ground across difficult terrain in that amount of time. Based on that timeline, it's difficult to determine how Mary could have left the area. And this is one of the aspects of the case that continues to raise questions about what happened in the minutes after her last sighting and the start of the family search. Because the scale of the search operation that took place was so large, it's understandable that people have questioned how it could be possible that Mary was not located at that time in the area. In the absence of physical evidence that would have suggested she succumbed to the terrain, such as entering a bog, some have theorized that she may have been taken from the area. The critical issue seems to be the timeline as reported. Whether this brief window between the last sighting, the 30-minute chat with the neighbors, and the return by 4:20 allowed for enough time for Mary to have been removed from the vicinity entirely. As reported by The Independent in 1999, during a conversation with Superintendent Aidan Murray, he said, "She definitely disappeared between point A and point B." With a concerned expression, he glanced at the damp, boggy distance between them. How could anybody dispose of a body in 20 minutes? It was a stark way of articulating the central puzzle. The timeline simply didn't seem to allow for what some theories suggested had happened. He also noted, on the day Mary went missing, there were 3 men illegally fishing with an otter board. These guys have eyes at the back of their heads and would have been keeping watch for the Gardaí. They never saw anything that day. This is actually a good point. These fishermen, engaged in illegal activity, would have been hyper-vigilant, constantly watching their surroundings. You'd think that if there was a third party in the area and something happened, they might have heard something, perhaps a scream or something along those lines, but they didn't. Retired Garda Sergeant Martin Collins, one of the original investigators, has said that he does not believe Mary wandered off and fell into water because, according to him, every area of water in the immediate vicinity was drained and searched at the time. However, based on statements that Aidan Murray made, there seems to be a discrepancy here. He said, "Because we had no body, there wasn't enough to go on. We have no high-tech equipment like we have now. We were basically probing the depths of bogs with short sticks rather than detectors. She could have fallen into a swallow hole, a bog hole covered over with a layer of old vegetation. It floats like a mat and opens like skin, but with nothing, only this mountain." It's always interesting, or frustrating really, when you have statements like that. One suggesting a thorough search, while the other suggests limited resources and methods. I'd imagine that means various areas were drained in 1977 and over time in subsequent searches over the years, because we know that the entire lake at Cashelard had been drained, believed to be in 1977. The other point in relation to the suggestion that Mary could have succumbed to the terrain is that it would have required her leaving the path. Critics and Mary's sister and argue that the path was relatively simple and that it was unlikely Mary could have gotten lost or strayed. Again, and was able to navigate the return journey from the halfway point back to the grandparents' house just fine. It is important to add that, given everything that had happened, it was hardly a natural experiment, and would have been aware that Mary was missing and that people were filming, and she simply walked back. For Mary, when she was out there, one could argue that things might have been more natural, and she could have explored and strayed, and then gotten into dangerous boggy territory. There's no evidence of that, of course, but it is possible. The years following the disappearance caused a devastating divide within the family and the broader community as to what was responsible. The authorities themselves treat Mary's case as an ongoing missing person investigation, and it's not clear what their suspicions might be behind closed doors. Mary's mother consistently expressed belief that she could still be alive, citing the absence of a body or any belongings found. She opposed public campaigns that declared Mary must have passed away. The Gardaí did focus for a while on the idea that someone might have seen the moment of separation between Mary and Jerry and then took advantage of that situation, though nothing ever really came of that line of inquiry. It's also important to clarify just how isolated this area was. There were only 2 houses anywhere near one another, the family farmhouse and the Macaulay farmhouse. And even they were separated by about half a mile. That was about it. Civilization was largely well away from this area. It seems drastically unlikely that anyone would have just been out and about randomly in this area. Unlike Mary's mother, Mary's sister, on the other hand, alongside many others, believed that Mary was met with harm by someone known to her. Mary's mother and sister had a complete cessation of contact after their differences pertaining to their thoughts and beliefs as to what happened on that day. After disputes between members of the family, the Gardaí made a policy decision that only Mary's mother would be designated point of contact for the authorities. Many people believe that to be unfair and believe that this decision minimized Mary's sister's influence in the investigation, and herself expressed frustration at not being kept informed in the same way that her mother was. In 2011, the Gardaí launched a new review into the circumstances surrounding the disappearance. It was led by a review team headed by Assistant Commissioner Kieran Kinney from the Northern Region, and they were said to be passionate about wanting to get to the bottom of this case. They conducted a wide range of interviews and further searches with the assistance of forensic experts. This work apparently yielded new evidence, though the specifics were not publicly shared. Based on whatever this evidence was, a rather major development occurred on the 21st of October, 2014, when a 64-year-old man who was already known to the authorities and imprisoned at that time was rearrested and brought in for questioning. This was the first actual arrest in relation to Mary in the 37 years that had passed by 2014. At the time, the Gardaí expressed strong public confidence, with an assistant commissioner stating that the arrest had brought them one step closer to finding answers. However, the evidence can't have been conclusive because this arrest was short-lived. On the 22nd of October, quite literally the day after the initial arrest, the man was released from custody without charge. As a result, people seemed to believe that this evidence must have been circumstantial or testimonial and was insufficient. Mary's case has been in the public eye for a very long time now, and you'd have to imagine that the authorities would be eager to have the case solved. In 2016, a journalist by the name of Gemma O'Doherty released a 1-hour and 23-minute film going over the entire incident, which is worth watching. In the film, Mary's sister publicly discussed her beliefs about what happened. 2 Garda sergeants were interviewed, and one claimed that certain pressures had been exerted onto their investigation from above. He stated that he was told to ease off by a superior when questioning someone. It seems that the media and attention generated by the film prompted the Gardaí to conduct a high-profile and significant excavation near Cashelard in the same year of its release. This search involved surveying the land and digging in areas nearby the very spot where she was last seen. But the effort failed to uncover anything. This failure led to new speculations, where some began to suggest that, given the large amount of time that had passed, evidence could have been moved at a later date after the original search took place in 1977. Over the years, numerous theories have been put forward in an attempt to explain what happened to Mary on that day in March of 1977. One suggestion was that she may have strayed and then fallen into a bog, although in that instance, you'd think that the search efforts might have uncovered something. Early media reports at the time of the disappearance did speculate that the cause could have been a natural mishap, but these thoughts generally seem to have faded away as no clothing, no crisp packet, nothing else ever came to light. Others have speculated regarding something more troubling. Mary's sister seems to believe it involved someone who knew Mary. Others suggest that an opportunistic stranger might have seen the separation and then come across Mary. The local fisherman did mention seeing a red car in the area, and initially seemed convinced that it had something to do with the disappearance, though he did seem to walk back on that later. Given the extreme isolation of the area, many have regarded this kind of scenario as being unlikely. Like every theory out there, none of them have ever been supported by evidence. We have a person that vanished without a trace, so thoroughly that not even a single shred of evidence ever turned up to conclusively point in any direction. I would also add that if the statements made by the retired Garda officers are true regarding orders to ease off, it raises difficult questions. I can only hope that such an order wasn't premature and that it didn't prevent evidence from arising. Almost 50 years later, what happened to Mary is still not known. There has never been any kind of trace found whatsoever. No clothing, no crisp packet, no body has ever surfaced, despite one of the largest search operations in Ireland to have ever taken place. The Gardaí continue even today to treat the case as a live missing person inquiry, and they periodically renew appeals for information, but no arrests have ever stuck, and no definitive official explanation has emerged. For Mary's mother, the absence of a body kept a sliver of hope alive that Mary was taken in 1977 and could still have been out there somewhere. For her twin sister and many others, they pointed to someone Mary knew and trusted on that remote hillside. Whatever actually happened, the disappearance of Mary Boyle on the 18th of March, 1977, shattered a family and divided a community. At this stage, it seems that if it's ever going to be understood, it's going to take someone with direct knowledge speaking up or some excavation uncovering something important. If you have any information, no matter how small or long ago, even if it feels irrelevant, the Gardaí still urge people to contact them, and you can do so confidentially. That brings us to the end of this episode. Please remember to like this video, drop a comment below with your thoughts on this case, and hit that subscribe button for Cold Case Chronicle if you haven't already. Your support means everything and helps us continue to shine a light on these unsolved mysteries. Thank you for watching, and until next time, stay safe.